Hi, and welcome to the third in this series of short videos I've been doing on creating surface. Today we are going to have a look at creating surface through collage. So I'm just going to get right to the handwork and flip my camera around. So let's start with a look at this piece. This is a piece which I have actually posted on the Facebook group page Artwork Art Play. It's one that I was working on from some of the kind of scribble starts that I did, and I think that was in my very first, or the second of the creating surface demos that I did, Facebook Lives. I'm just going to try to get this flat. Anyway, I think for all intents and purposes we can see what I would like you to look at in this piece. Actually, I usually look at it this way just out of habit. Yeah, so these pieces here, these red pieces, were collage pieces that I applied in the very last stages. So that was an example of using collage to simplify. Sometimes I love creating surface so much that I create a lot of activity and then it's very hard to kind of simplify. And I find collage is really helpful for that. But more about that later. I want to talk about different kinds of collage papers and how to make them too. So let's put this aside. And I have a stack of papers here. A lot of us like to use collage papers that we find. So found collage papers like these, for instance, this dress pattern here. And the interesting thing about dress patterns is that they introduce a kind of visual language. So we're going to be talking more about visual language. And it is something that comes up a lot when I teach because it's the unifying, one of the most important unifying aspects of making a piece of art. We have to figure out what our visual language is, and often our visual language is really personal too once we've been working for a while. But if we look at this piece of dressmaker of this pattern, we'll see there's a visual language of dashing and of circles, arrows. So even a simple collage paper can really start to take you in a different direction. The problem with using sourced collage paper is that it can be, the dyes in them can be non-light fast. So I really like to make my own collage papers. And I'm going to go through a few different ways to do that. So these ones are jelly prints. This is made from jelly printing, from a jelly plate. And if you want to know more about that, I have a video on my YouTube channel on making jelly prints from a jelly plate. And you can even make your own jelly plate. I talk about that on the video on my channel too. And I really love them because there's so many elements of surprise in them. And this one is on a piece of tissue paper. And if you have looked at, well, even in my very first creating surface video, I showed you how you could transfer paint onto tissue paper and then collage it onto an active surface, and the tissue paper kind of disappears, and so you get the pattern just floating on the surface. I love that about working on just plain cheap tissue paper. And tissue paper itself is not archival, but the paints and the inks that I'm using are. And the tissue paper gets buried in layers of plastic acrylic medium. So in all intents and for all intents and purposes, it ends up in an archival form because it gets really buried and protected from the air, which is what breaks paper down. So that's fun to use jelly print papers. Here's some more jelly print papers, and some more. I know some of you have done some jelly printing, and it's great because it generates a lot of pages of possible collage papers really fast. I just love it. So other types of papers though, let's talk about the papers themselves. So I've already talked about tissue paper. Another type of paper you can use for collaging is deli paper. So it's a little bit thicker and it's not as transparent. So when you collage it on, it has a different effect. And I'm going to be doing a few samples of this in a few minutes. You can also use, well, basically any kind of paper you can source. This paper a student brought me, it's a kind of paper that they use on medical examining tables. They get them in rolls, and it's a kind of in between deli paper and tissue paper. And I'm not sure, where you'd find that, but I quite like it as well. So when I print, when I make my own collage papers, there's different ways that I like to make them. I've already talked about jelly printing, but you can also print with things that you find around the house, like this corrugated cardboard. That's how I made this pattern. These are fun. These are rubber mat underlays. You can see I've used it a lot. It's really well used, and it creates this very specific visual language. So when you're using something like this, or a stencil, a commercial stencil, that creates a very, very particular visual language. So this language would be, rich with pattern and repetition. And if I integrated the collage papers into a piece, if I made it with this, I would then work off of some of the visual languages of the circle. And, we often do turn to circles. I think circles are just such a satisfying shape. But a circle isn't just a circle, it's also curves. And there's the sense of the positive form of the circle, but the negative form of the circle too, and you can play with scale. So again, that's back to visual language. I'm going to be exploring more about visual language in my play dates, which are coming up in early October, my free sessions, 3 days, October 3rd, 5th, and 7th. And you can read all about that on my website. So here's another stencil which would, introduce a really strong visual language. Here's some handmade stencils that a friend of mine gave me. They're just, I guess they're just little rubber washers glued onto cardboard. So those can be quite fun to create papers. But I like to just kind of make my own papers, either by drawing directly onto the collage paper or painting onto it. Like here's just a solid piece, like I did here with that ripped, but that was just painted on tissue paper with plain cadmium red, and that is what I used when I collaged back onto this piece. So then you'll notice that I went in and worked on top of it with opaque paint. So I interacted with the collage piece. So, this is just the way that I work with collage. There are so many different ways of working. You should have a look at the art of Jane Davies. She's the master of collage, and she is also really good to turn to for great explanations about visual language. So that was what I made, and then collage directly on here to create these simplified areas. You can see why I like the tissue paper is what is underneath is still showing through there. And you can choose to let that sit, or here I've painted it away. In places that I've painted it away. So it's I just love the kind of potential, the possibilities that open up when you use collage papers. This paper, these ones, this little pair of landscapes, this landscape and this one, were landscapes I did for a demo for a group in California. And these pieces here, this kind of scratchy look here, and here also were created by collaging on tissue paper that I'd painted on directly with a kind of a scratchy brush. And then some of the other pieces, this is a solid piece of orange, and then some of the other color is glazing with inks. And we all know about glazing now because I talked about that on my last Facebook Live. And I don't know whether you've had a chance to have a look at the little film that I made. It's also on my YouTube channel on following through with that image that I made on my glazing Facebook Live and developing it further so you could see how I used many layers of transparent paper to create a water painting. But that's not what we're talking about today. So back to making my own papers. So here's some papers that have been just painted with the brush. I think that's cobalt blue. And here's some that I've transferred paint. Remember the transfer technique where you just push it, you put the paint on a piece of wax paper, draw into it, and then press the wax paper onto the paper. This is that examining room paper. And I've chosen this kind of visual language here specifically because I was going to go into this painting, which was one of my scribble paintings. This was the one that I actually used I went back because I'd skipped the drawing gum on my demo, and so I went in and did another little piece of film about using drawing gum to simplify active surfaces. And I'm getting these kind of boat shapes, so I thought it would be interesting to use these pieces on this work in progress because it's very, very, very active. And so as with the other one I showed you, I really like to use collage to simplify. So I'm going to come back to that. But that's a paper that I made from transferring. Here's a paper I made from printing off of kind of a found object. That's on a piece of deli paper. Here's another one of these transfer pieces. This is a transfer. Sometimes I need to get dark back into things, so I'll just create some really dark papers. And sometimes I need to get light back into things, so we'll just use titanium white. And again, this is through the transfer. I really like the transfer technique because it's like a monoprinting technique, because it really, again, sort of takes some of the onus off of that we might find with working with a brush, for instance, and create surprises with the process itself. So here's some more that I made specifically for this piece, thinking I might need some pinks, I might need some more blues, and you can see there's these kind of, I've got this linear visual language. It's occurring here in a lot of different ways. I've scratched through here. I've drawn on in a horizontal way. So that's part of the visual language. Even this is part of the linear visual language, which was created by the brush when I put the drawing gum down there. And the other visual language is the boat language, which is actually, again, a circle visual language. And here it is up here. It might be red as a sun. So those are some of the papers that I've created that I thought might be fun to use in this piece. So I was working with the palette that I'd originally worked with, which was phthalo blue, a couple of different blues, manganese blue, French ultramarine blue, and alizarin crimson, and maybe I think there might be some phthalo green there too. And here is another boat image, and this one I made by just grabbing a piece of styrofoam. We all have this, right, in our kitchens, and drawing into it and kind of creating my own print, which has got the visual language that I'm interested in. So that's how I got this piece here. So basically I use collage for two things: to enrich a surface, like this one. So here's just the beginnings of a painting, a lot of activity. This was all made with transferring, so I put black paint down on wax paper, drew into it, and then pressed it down. And but it's just the beginnings of the piece. And so then I was trying to see what this sort of examining table paper does, and I really like what it does. It's like the tissue paper. It allows us to see underneath, and it just sits like a pattern on the top, but it's a bit more solid. So why don't I'll just do a couple of very short examples of applying the collage, because we want to get that right, because you want to make sure that the collage is really well attached. And so I use acrylic medium. I often just turn to gloss medium, because gloss medium preserves and enhances the colors. Although in the final layer, if I don't want a glossy surface like this one, it's quite matte. I could use a matte medium, but in this case I actually used a cold wax and just applied cold wax to it. And when it is dry now, and I could choose to burnish it now, rub it and get a bit of shine, but I kind of like the flat surface of it. It's not very reflective. So let's put I'm going to do another piece on here. There's a little bit of this linear language here, so I thought I might take a piece of this. And tissue paper will tear. All paper, it has a grain like fabric. It will tear in one direction and not in another. But you can either tear it or cut it with scissors. So let me just apply that. I'm going to put the gloss medium down and take a wide brush. It's nice to see the comments. I'm just scrolling down the comments here. So nice to see everybody from far and near. Just great. Okay, back to my image. I've got to keep my image and my focus too, or I can't see what my hands are doing. So thank you for coming, everybody. I love it when the Australians come too. That's pretty special. All right, and the Brits and the Canadians. All right, then I've put a little medium on top too. Let me try to straighten this out for you. It's a bit of a clutter here today. And I'm using a fairly big brush and really trying. The tissue paper is a little tricky because it's so flimsy, and sometimes it breaks if you handle it too heavily. But on the other hand, it's pretty easy to get the medium, get it really soaked with medium. So let's get a heavier paper, and maybe I'll go to this one because that's kind of fun. Here's the heavier paper that is the roll of medical paper. See how this rips in this direction. I like to do a combination of ripping and cutting, just because again the rips kind of create this surprising events. So I'm going to collage that on there. That's a big piece of pink, but as with the other one that I showed you, I like to interact with it afterwards too. I mean, putting the collage on isn't the last stage usually for me. I really like to use inks because they will just tint the collage pieces without changing them too much. But occasionally, towards the end, I'll often put on opaque paints, because opaque paints really help us to build form and really simplify our compositions. Now with a heavier piece of paper, you might find it's a bit wrinkly. What I find is really useful is to just really roll that with the brayer. A brayer is a great tool to have. Obviously for the printing techniques, because it just really spreads paint in a really nice way. So I did get a little wrinkle there, but it happens. But have a look at what's going on with the surface now. So here's the visual language of the boat, and we can see through. So I love this kind of interaction between the collage paper and what's lying underneath it. So let me see if I can find something else to add to this piece. I've lost some of my lighter values. So, you know, often the last stages of a painting, and this is nowhere near its last stages, of course, are making sure we get our whole value range. So I'll often end up adding some more whites and some more darks. So again, there's a kind of visual language here that I made with some of those silicone scoring tools. I'll show you one. This is it, into the wet paint. And the great thing about collage too is that you get a chance to kind of think about you know, where you want to put things. So because we can fool around with it, like where do I need some light? And I won't take too long to think about it today, because if I actually worked in the kind of time frame I usually work in, we'd be here all morning. So I'm going to put that vertically. You saw that I got the medium really thoroughly down underneath the piece. And if you kind of work from the middle and out towards the edges, you'll prevent the possibility of getting wrinkles. So that's the tissue paper again. And let's have a look at the deli paper, because we haven't tried that yet. Here's some deli paper. I was just looking for my scissors, which are kind of lost in the chaos here. Here they are. Again, I purposely drew in the vertical language. And I think I'll just kind of make another boat shape, this time with scissors, and this is the deli paper. It can be kind of hard sometimes to find deli paper. I ordered it online. Unless you have a friend with a deli. So how about, and what's fun too is you can work over top of the papers you've already laid down. Why not? Or would it be better here? That's kind of nice. I think I'll bring it in a little bit. So, as I said before, there's kind of two things that I do with collaging. I use it to enrich, and I use it to simplify. And right now, I'm kind of not really sure which one I'm doing here. It's some of these bigger pieces are maybe simplifying the space a little bit, but I'm also enriching the surface. But it's at a later stage than this one, which was really just all about enriching the surface. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say about collage, and I may take some of these a little further, and I'll certainly post them on the Facebook page if I do that. And have a look pop into my website to see what I'm up to with playdates in October. We're going to be exploring surface and enriching surface and simplifying surface, and then starting October 18th, I start my 6-week master class. So that's also, you can also find out more about that on my website. And we dive deeper into things like visual language, color, and value. And lots of mindset, because we don't get anywhere unless we know how to control the doubts, to make sure that we're not getting in our own way, which I think is as important a skill as an artist as the actual technical materials and technique skills. So we'll be talking about what I've learned after 25 years of painting and teaching, and I'd love to share that with you. So I've enjoyed doing these 3 sessions on glazing, and that's all available to look at under events on our page. So have fun with collage papers.